Hello there, writer friend. Welcome back to Max Answers Writing Advice Questions, National Novel Writing Month edition. You have sent your questions. I've got answers. They have been put into a random number generator, and I've got 3 questions to answer today. But before I go anywhere, I want to remind you, of course, that I'm still taking questions. You gotta write in question, leave in the comments down below. I did an enormous answer-a-thon. I may do another one, It's all up in the cards. I want to hear your feedback and hear what you have to say. But for now, let's take it from the top. The following is merely just my advice, my opinion, and what works for me. Don't take it as gospel. Instead, take it as the ramblings of a silly person with a modicum in their pocket. Silliness out of the way. Let's take it from the top. The first question, a little bit of a long one, but it goes a little bit like this. Do you have any advice for what to do when you realize you have a plot hole in your story? In my case, it's a motivation problem. The entire story would be avoided if the main character was just like, nah, and walked away. Nothing's holding them to the situation. Big story writing problem. The thing with plot holes is this, okay? If you look at it long enough, anything can seem like a plot hole, especially if you're in the middle of writing, let's say like right in the middle of the second act, depending on how you write stories. I like to use a 3-act structure because I am a theater nerd, but if you're in the middle of the second act, everything will probably seem like a plot hole to you. Here's what I have to say about plot holes right off the start. You gotta be careful about what you think it's a plot hole and what you don't think it's a plot hole, because basically every Shakespearean story would have been avoided if people had just talked. It's like, hey, we should just sit down and share our feelings. That way the entire story would be avoided. That's not a plot hole. I think a plot hole, primarily, because that's what I look into stories, is when a character acts against the way that they have been portrayed to us through the story. In the example that you posed, if a character had said no at this particular time, nothing would have happened, the story wouldn't have, progressed as we experienced it. Now, the same can be said about basically any story. If a character had done this at this particular point, nothing would have happened. Peter Parker would have never become Spider-Man. Superman would have never, I guess, Kal-El. I don't actually even like Superman. So, is that his name? I think it's Kal-El, right? Anyhow, if X hadn't happened, the whole story wouldn't have, transpired. That's not actually a plot hole. I think to me a plot hole, and that's why I'm not saying what you have is not a plot hole, but what I'm saying is that I'm looking at the question, in my second monitor, by the way, you're saying that nothing is holding them to the situation, and what I have to come out and ask really quickly, and a follow-up to this will actually be really interesting, but my thing is this. Based on who the character is, up until the point where they make that choice, does them making the choice make sense to the reader? Does it echo with who they are as a person? I mean, just because it doesn't hold them back doesn't mean they can't make the choice. Curiosity is as any good reason to, make any sort of choice. You have to inspect. To me, plot holes are more generally based on character motivations, like you said, but or what pushes a character to do things, based on who they are as a person. Now, I can't say, whether what you have is or is not a plot hole, but I can offer you a few bits of advice. First and foremost, pinpoint what you think the problem is. Of course, in your question, you've pointed out that it's probably a motivation thing, and here's what I gotta say. If you're in the middle of writing the story, make a big note somewhere, probably print it out and stick it in your wall somewhere. Fix this. Fix the main character's motivation at this point of the story later. If you're still writing, keep doing your thing. Keep writing as though you have given them motivations. Because basically, if you know that it's a motivation problem, find a reason for them to go out and do this. But that is, of course, something that you should probably only worry about during the revision draft. If you're in the middle of writing, just keep writing the story. Some people out there may recommend you to go back and revise the entire story. I am not one of them. I feel like you can lose momentum and spend your time unwisely by going back and revising the story. You're gonna fix that eventually. Fix it once the story is complete. Because right now you may brainstorm what their motivations is for making that choice, and it will be nice. But if you keep writing and you discover a natural motivation for them, one that comes through the act of writing and not brainstorming, it would feel more natural and organic. The entire process of revision is to look at your story and to, patch over the things that are a little ambiguous and to take the feelings and the moments and bring them into the foreground, okay? It's okay that things don't make entire sense right now. You're gonna patch it over because you're a good writer, and good writers revise. Now, the following question is a little silly, but I left it in here because that's what the random number generator gave me, but also because it brings up a really, really important point. And the question goes a little bit like this. I wanted to ask, are contractions allowed in novels or any other literary work? Timer, start. So when I first got that question, I was like, that's something a little odd to ask. But then I put myself in somebody's shoes, and I don't remember the last time I did an essay for an English class in high school, but I'm pretty sure contractions are not exactly allowed. Because it makes it sound informal, I believe. It's been a while. And I'm pretty sure that, if you're young and you're taking what your English professor tells you as some sort of grounding for your fiction writing, it is entirely likely you may consider yourself, wow, should I actually use contractions? Because I've been told not to use them. Are they okay in fiction though? And I'm here to tell you, yes it is! Storytelling, the act of writing, is merely just an evolution of the way of telling stories through voice. It all began people sharing stories around a campfire, and writing is merely just an evolution of that. And that is why, especially for stories that are first-person perspective or somebody sharing the story, contractions are super perfect, no problem. Why? Because people talk like that, It always sounds weird when somebody says, cannot. You do not stop me. It's done mostly for, to make things more serious, but, nobody, people don't say stuff like that in real life. So if somebody's sharing a story, it makes sense for them to contract things, don't, can't, isn't. Those things sound like someone talking. And that is why, especially, the big bulk of my advice before I go anywhere else is this. There are not many hard rules for writing, for the act of writing itself. Basically, if you can pull it off, you can pull it off. If it works, it works. Simple as that. People out there give you rules, and I sometimes offer what I think are rules from my perspective, but I only use those. The rules that I offer you are always just format advices to make the story more easily readable for the reader. Now, this doesn't apply to contractions because contractions are perfect, there's nothing wrong with them, and you can totally use them in writing, especially for stories that are first-person narration in which it's clearly somebody talking. It's somebody sharing a story. So it makes sense that the writing flows like someone is speaking. And just really quickly, before moving to the final question, I gotta say this, and I hate to be that, hipster, but take everything anyone tells you, including me, with a grain of salt. Remember that anything anyone tells you is ultimately their advice, their opinion, and what works for them. You're a person of your own, with your own opinion, your own past, your own history, an entire collection of events that have brought you to this point in place and time, and you deserve to create your very own ways to go about doing things. As I say, whenever I tell you what I think, it's just that. My advice, my opinion, and what works for me. Create your own toolbox, your writer's toolbox, and create your very own way to do things, okay? Whenever your English teacher tells you to never do this, take it with a grain of salt. Maybe you agree with it, maybe you don't. Maybe you agree with what I say, maybe you don't. That's okay. And really quickly, if you're wondering, what do I talk about when I mean the writer's toolbox? It's from Stephen King's book On Writing, by Stephen King. It's a really good writing. It's half memoir and half writing advice book. Really good. There's a link to it in the description below. You want to go check it out. The audiobook is just downright amazing. I recommend that. That is I don't like to give required reading because it always feels a little forced, but if there's one book I recommend, it's that book. No question about it. Whenever I feel down about my writing, I listen to that book. Stephen King reads it himself, and it's just so effective, really fun. I read it at least once a year. Every time Max recommends on writing, take a shot, I guess, of water. Stay hydrated. And with that, let's go on to the final question of today's video, which goes a little bit like this. What do you think about basing your characters off of real life people? People you know, not famous. Of course, they're not carbon copies of the people I know, but I am still afraid if it ever gets published, they could sue. Is this something I should be worried about? If so, how do I fix it? Now, I did actually do a video on that a while back. You can check it out on the channel. I think it's basically called Using Real Life People as Inspiration for Your Writing. I talk mostly about using famous people and famous places, so it's not exactly fully related to what you're asking, but it will give you a nice foundation of what to look for. Now, here is what I have to say about using real life people as inspiration. And again, my opinion, what I think, I generally like to stay away from that as hard as possible. It's not something that I even found myself trying at times, but I understand why people find themselves doing stuff like this. I mean, after all, I believe J.K. Rowling has gone on record to say that the character of Hagrid was inspired by this biker guy she met at a bar once, who like just was talking about his garden and stuff, like a huge guy with a huge beard who was like the nicest person in the world. I think inspiration like that is okay, and I have to be honest with you right now. In the concept of fiction, unless you outright say this person is this person, you're pretty much in the clear, because there's no legal ground for being like, hey, this person I know wrote about a character with light brown hair and brown eyes and about 6 feet 7 inches. It's me. I want you to give me $1 million because you use me in your book. Now, from a legal standpoint, you have to say X person's name, and you have to do it in a bad light to make it even more problematic. Now, sorry, my timer got interrupted in the middle of that, but really quickly. Not to actually answer your question. Do I think it's a problem? I don't think it's a problem as long as you never, ever tell anyone about it. Because, again, as long as you're not using the names and you're not, putting them under a bad light, such as taking that English professor you didn't like from high school and just, making her the villain of your story. Miss Crutchfield. I actually love Miss Crutchfield. She was a really wonderful teacher. The best out of all the ones I had in high school. But anyhow, as long as you're not using names, which can be used as factual evidence for, suing, I think you're pretty much in the clear. I would recommend you to kind of step away from that if you can. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about that. It's kind of a silly subject, but I thought that I would tackle it for anyone out there who's still, feeling a little bit iffy about situations like that. Remember, as always, that if you have questions of your own, you should leave them in the comments down below, and I'll add them to the pile of questions for maybe an upcoming answer-a-thon or upcoming videos. And with Monokuma back in place, I want to thank you for watching. Thank you for spending a little bit of your day with me, and I'll be seeing you with more writing advice on the next one.